And every speaker is different. So what you do or what you don't do is completely up to you. It depends on what you find that works. But I create what's called a memory palace. And this actually comes out of a Sherlock Holmes book. It actually comes way before that, like Roman speakers, the ones that would get up and orate for like 5 hours would remember things this way. What you do is you create kind of a physical journey of your talk, and you put out things that are going to remind you of certain bits. And you just kind of get used to walking this journey as you say your talk, and things will hang on in your mind. Now, the nice thing about creating a memory palace, and I'll explain more about what it actually is here in a second, but the best part about creating it this way is that if you get off in your talk, if something happens in your trip, you have the someone who comes in the back door with 2 kids, 6 umbrellas, and 4 bags and rattles and makes as much noise as possible and throws you off. And I'm saying this because I've had it happen. If you have a memory palace, you can get back on track because you can remember what your next step is. So, for example, for my talk, my opening story starts with me sleeping on the couch. And so that's where I start. In my memory palace, I'm sitting on my couch for real, and I'm doing that story. So that as I'm doing that story, I'm reliving what it feels like, what it sounds like, what it smells like to be on this couch. The next part of my talk, I actually define empathy because, as anybody knows who's listened to my podcast, I'm very passionate about making sure we're all talking about the same thing. And there's a lot of misconceptions about empathy. So I have a book on my table about empathy. And as I'm talking that part of my talk, I'm looking at that book so that I can say, okay, these are my definitions. This is what this is about. I move a little bit around my coffee table to where I have an intro paragraph. And then when I move to the other side of my table, I have 3 highlighters sitting there because I talk about 3 kinds of empathy. So as I'm looking at these 3 highlighters, they remind me, yeah, these are the 3 kinds of empathy I want to highlight. Then I go over to a different table and I start talking about the 2 ways we relate through self-empathy. So I have 2 candles there because I'm talking about bringing the light onto empathy. And you get the picture. I mean, everywhere I go, there's something to remind me of the little bits of my talk. And the thing I've done in the middle of it is I've taken bits and pieces off of my visualization board, like a little sign that I had that said TEDx. And I have it sitting right there just to remind myself that, this is real. It's really happening, which is exciting. Then, once I've done this walk through my memory palace, what feels like about 100,000 times, then I start practicing in front of my camera and I watch because I want to see what body movements I have, what motions I'm doing, how I'm bringing the audience with me. I actually don't do this watching part so much just because I'm kind of trying to stay within my own eyes. I will do a lot of visualization though, which means that as I'm talking, I will close my eyes and I'll visualize the audience and I'll visualize the people in it and I'll visualize me turning and speaking to them and going through my talk. If you do one thing for speaking, I think this one's the most important. This is something I learned to do as a musician because you're not going to be on the front of the stage playing a concerto in front of an audience until you do it. So you can't practice it. So the only way to practice it is to practice it in your mind. Now, the good thing is that your mind doesn't necessarily recognize the difference between memories, what you're creating within your mind, and real things. So if you do this enough over and over and over again, your mind gets used to it as if you're actually doing it, which gives you the chance to practice what you're doing before you do it. This is something else that athletes and artists do all the time because there's no other way to be able to get this kind of practice. You can't practice for the Super Bowl by going to the Super Bowl over and over. I think Tom Brady has the record right now and he still has 11, 12? I don't know. Someone in the audience knows this better than I do. But the point is that's different than putting in 10,000 hours in Super Bowls. You can't. So in order to get that practice, visualize what you're doing. Visualize where you're going. Visualize what it's going to sound like, what it's going to smell like, what it's going to see, what you're going to see, what you're going to do. Take the time to look up the hall if you can. Get an idea of what you're actually going to be seeing and doing.